Well, the solo albums had come and gone, and it was time to do another Kiss record. And the next record was Dynasty. Dynasty was a unique record only because it was the guys getting back together again after all sorts of traumas that happened with the solo albums. And now we had to decide on a producer. Well, as it happens, the producer that finally turned out to do Dynasty was Vinnie Poncia. For a number of reasons. One, Peter had used him for a solo album, and he had refused to do the next album unless he could use Vinnie Poncia. Well, we all liked Vinnie a lot, and so Vinnie became the producer of record. The next thing was to find the music, and the music obviously was written by Kiss, but one song we needed to fulfill our obligations to Casablanca was a disco song. Well, none of us really wanted to do a disco song, but Casablanca had become famous for doing disco records, and Donna Summer was on the label and so forth and so on, but so we decided to do a disco record called I Was Made for Loving You, which ironically turned out to be probably the second most played single that Kiss had ever done, the first being Beth, and the second being I Was Made for Loving You, a world hit, and followed us around the world as we did the world tour. The Dynasty show turned out to be the biggest Kiss show we had ever done. It took 16 semis to travel around the United States. It was a monstrous show with a very large crew. And we put it together in Lakeland, Florida, and we finally started the show, doing the first couple of shows in Florida, then moving up the East Coast. When we get to Atlanta, I had already flown back to the offices in New York, and I got a call from the head production manager. The production manager let me know that after tonight's show, they were quitting. They were quitting because the show was too big. It should have never come on the road, and it was impossible to do. Well, I got on a plane and flew to Atlanta right away, and I came into the Omni, which was the arena that we were doing the show in, and the head production manager came over to me and said, Bill, look, this is impossible. The show just doesn't work. It's way too big, and I'm really telling you that after tonight, we're all quitting. It just can't be done. And I said, well, okay, let me think about it. And I said, we'll have a meeting to talk it over in 15 minutes. You get all your crews together. Now, knowing that I couldn't very well take the Kiss show off the road, it was costing millions of dollars to put it on, I had to find some way to get through that evening and convince people that we could do the show. So we gathered all our production crew together. And as I'm talking about the show, I started to realize that the show was obviously very big, but that no one had ever seen the show. We had rehearsed it for weeks, but it was so complicated. Each particular person had its own idea of what they had to do, but never had seen the show put together because they were too busy working on their own little departments. So I finally started explaining the show to them. Everyone looked at me with this blank stare saying, yeah, is that the way it's supposed to be? I said, well, tonight, here's what we're going to do. We're going to go through the show step by step. And at the end of the night, you'll see that this show can work and how exciting it can be and how it could stay on the road. Well, there was a lot of hemming and hawing. We went through everything about the show step by step again. We went through all the pyros, all the stage sets, every change in the show, where the music, why it was supposed to happen, what was supposed to happen in every section of the show. Everyone seemed to understand. I told them to go out and check everything out. Everyone went out and checked. We came back. We had one more meeting. Finally, that night, they got to see the show because everyone was aware of something that I had never expected during rehearsals, which was that no one ever got to see the show. And they finally saw it that night in Atlanta. It went off perfectly, and everyone decided to keep the show on the road. Now, let me tell you about some of the things that never made the show. There was a couple of laser effects that we wanted. One was a huge laser setup that was underneath the stage that at one part of the show would put laser bars completely around the stage so it would look like Kiss was in a cage, a laser cage. Well, we spent an enormous amount of money at that time. I think it cost about $150,000, $200,000 to have this one effect, which the day that we set up didn't work. And it was a horrible story, everyone complaining and everything else. And we finally had to fire the laser company and, of course, everyone was a little down about that. And one of the other effects that was supposed to be part of this was a laser beam that would come out of Paul's eye. We were going to have a fiber optic cord running along with a guitar cord, and it would run up through his costume and out behind his ear. so that the laser beam would look like it's coming directly out of his eye. And it was scrapped also at the last minute because Paul was afraid it would damage his eye. So that's one effect you never got to see. Now, let's talk about one other thing. I mean, all of you know that I figured that Gene had so much presence on stage and had so much to do that I really had to balance it out by giving Paul something to do and something that would look great for him. I initially thought that we'd have Paul fly from the stage to the lighting grid, where he would sing one of his songs. And it would just fulfill that part of the show and balance off what Gene had on the other side of the stage. When I described it to Paul, he listened carefully and then told me, no, he didn't think so. He thought he'd be too scared to fly from the stage, and the wires, would they hold him? Wouldn't they hold him? There would be too many complications. Of course, the minute he said no, Gene raised his hand and said, I'll do it. As always, Gene felt anything else he could do on stage he would do, and usually did. So anyway, that was the story about how Gene finally got to fly to the lighting grid. The Dynasty tour, as I mentioned before, was a huge, huge tour in the sense of the type of people, the stage set, and the complete show. As the show continued and as we traveled around the world, it was becoming obvious that the show was so big that unless we really sold out every show, there was not going to be a lot of money made on the tour. This became a problem at the end of the tour, certainly for me and for the group, based on the fact that their business managers at the time kept telling them they're not making money on tours. There was a lot of complications, I think, that came from this. One, this particular tour didn't sell out, probably because the Dynasty album wasn't one of their biggest selling albums. We had just done the solo albums. There was an awful lot of Kiss product out there. And although we had a hit song on the Dynasty album, which was I Was Made for Loving You, it was really bigger outside the United States than it was inside the United States. So that overall the album sales were down slightly and the attendance on the show were down, and therefore we didn't get to make the profits that certainly their business managers wanted them to make.